When people think of cowboys, they usually picture wide open plains, horses, gunfights, maybe a dusty saloon. But there's one part of cowboy life most don't really think about: how they actually lived day to day without basic things like soap or toilets. No bathrooms, no showers, no clean running water. So, how did they deal with it? What did they do when they had to wash up or when nature called out on the trail? In this video, we're going to break down what life was really like for cowboys when it came to staying clean. Or not. Number 1. Dirt was just part of life. Cowboys didn't live clean, and they didn't expect to. Out on the range, surrounded by dust, cattle, and open sky, staying dirty was just a part of the deal. Most of them went days, sometimes even weeks, without a proper wash. Water was a rare resource, especially during the long cattle drives, and every drop of it had a purpose. If you were lucky, you used it for drinking and maybe cooking. Using it for bathing? That was a waste in most cases. Bathing, when it happened, was usually quick and rough. A river or creek might do if one was nearby and not frozen. A cowboy would strip down, splash himself off, maybe scrub with a handful of sand or ashes from the fire. That was it. There were no towels, no soap bars, no privacy. Just water, wind, and whatever grit was available. Some carried cloths to wipe themselves down, but that was rare. The effort it took just to stay alive and moving made cleanliness a distant concern. Soap wasn't something you packed into your saddlebag unless you were headed to town. When they had any, it was often homemade lye soap, strong, basic, and rough on skin. It was made by boiling down animal fat and wood ash into a solid block. It cleaned, sure, but it also dried the skin, burned if you had cuts, and left behind a bitter scent. Cowboys didn't use it daily. Most didn't use it weekly. It was there for when you needed to wash off blood, grease, or something worse. And smell? Everyone smelled. After a few days on the trail, the scent of sweat, smoke, and horse rubbed into every piece of clothing and every inch of skin. But nobody noticed because everybody stank. It was a shared condition and no one judged you for it. Cowboys might freshen up a bit before heading into a town or saloon, but otherwise they wore the same shirts, pants, and boots until they were stiff with dirt. Being dirty wasn't a failure. It was expected. The Wild West didn't reward comfort. It rewarded endurance. A clean cowboy was either very new or not working hard enough. Dirt meant you were doing your job, surviving the trail and pushing through the long, brutal days like everyone else. Number 2, toilets were holes or nothing. Out on the open range, the idea of having a bathroom as we know it today didn't even exist in the cowboys' world. Most of the time, if nature called, you simply found a spot that offered a bit of distance from the camp and a little privacy if you could find any. There were no outhouses waiting at the edge of the trail, no structures built for comfort, and certainly no thought given to sanitation in the modern sense. Cowboys did what they had to do, behind a bush, near a rock, maybe crouched behind the chuck wagon if the wind was right. And the only real rule? Don't go too close to camp and always stay downwind. During long cattle drives, the trail offered nothing but dirt, grass, and whatever you could use to shield yourself for a moment. Sometimes you went in the wide open with no cover at all, hoping nobody was looking, or more realistically, just not caring if they were. When they stayed at a ranch, things could be slightly more civilized. Some ranches dug simple pits into the ground and put a plank or wooden seat over them. These were basic outhouses with no walls and no roof, maybe just a board for balance. Compared to what they had on the trail, even that felt like a luxury. Toilet paper wasn't part of the gear. Most cowboys had never seen it. Instead, they used whatever nature provided. Leaves if the season was right, sticks if it wasn't, grass when it was tall, snow in the cold months. And when none of that was around, scraps of fabric from worn-out clothes did the job. In rare cases, they might carry a newspaper or tear out pages from an old catalog, but that was more likely to be used for fire starting than wiping. It was uncomfortable, unsanitary, and never discussed openly. Cowboys didn't sit around trading stories about it or joking about the experience. It was simply another part of life that you handled without comment. They got used to the discomfort because they had no choice. It was part of the harshness of the trail, just like eating cold beans for breakfast or sleeping with a loaded revolver under your blanket. In the end, using the bathroom in the Wild West wasn't an event. It was a moment you got through quietly and quickly, then moved on like it never happened. Number 3, clothes stayed dirty. Cowboys didn't dress to impress. Their clothes weren't about style or appearance. They were about function, and they were pushed to the limit every single day. A cowboy's wardrobe wasn't large. In fact, it barely qualified as a wardrobe at all. Most had the clothes on their back, maybe an extra shirt tucked away somewhere, and if they were lucky or careful with money, a cleaner set saved for Sundays or for when they rode into town. But on the trail, day after day, week after week, they wore the same gear without changing or washing it unless they absolutely had to. Washing clothes wasn't part of the daily routine. It wasn't even weekly. It happened when the smell became too much even for them, or when the grime made the fabric too stiff to move in. And even then, it wasn't a full wash. There were no tubs, no soap flakes, no brushes. You found a stream, if one was close, and you did what you could. Some cowboys dunked their shirts into the water, stomped them clean with their boots, rubbed them with a handful of sand or ashes, then left them to dry across a rock or bush. That was the whole process. No warm water, no wringing things out, and definitely no folding when it was done. They didn't have detergent, they didn't use any kind of softener, and nobody had time to sit around waiting for clothes to smell fresh. Clean was just less dirty. The condition of their clothes said a lot about the work they did. Pants were often stiff with dried sweat and dust. Boots were heavy with caked-on mud, cracked from heat and scarred from wear. Shirts smelled like smoke from campfires, mixed with sweat, cattle, and leather. You didn't change your shirt because it was dirty. You changed it because it was falling apart. And if it wasn't falling apart yet, you kept wearing it. Patches were common. Cowboys stitched up their own holes with rough thread, or tied fabric scraps around elbows and knees to keep gear going a little longer. But these clothes weren't just clothes, they were tools. The bandana around the neck wasn't a fashion choice. It kept dust out of your mouth during long rides, wiped sweat off your face in the heat, and sometimes cleaned the blade of your knife or the soot off your tin plate. The wide-brimmed hat wasn't for looks. It blocked the brutal sun, caught rain, and sometimes acted as a bucket. Every piece of clothing had a job to do. Spurs weren't for show, they controlled the horse. Chaps protected your legs from brush, thorns, and saddle wear. Looking good wasn't part of the cowboy mindset. Surviving the work was. They weren't concerned with how they appeared to others. They were focused on keeping their gear functional and their bodies moving. Clean clothes didn't matter if your boots gave out or your coat couldn't block the cold. Everything they wore had to serve a purpose, and if it didn't last long. Dirt was constant, but it didn't slow them down. Their clothes absorbed the story of the trail, day after day, layer by layer. And to them, that was just part of the life they chose. Number 4, disease and infection were constant threats. The rough conditions of cowboy life weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous in ways that most people today don't fully grasp. Living without access to soap, toilets, or even basic sanitation created an environment where disease could spread fast and without warning. Cowboys weren't just dealing with long hours, brutal weather, or physical exhaustion. They were also constantly surrounded by health risks that could turn a small wound or a bad drink of water into something deadly. A blister from a boot, a cut from barbed wire, or even a splinter from rough wood. Any of these could lead to infection. And out there on the trail with no disinfectant and no real first aid, there was no easy way to stop it from getting worse. A swollen leg, a fever, or a sore tooth might start small, but cowboys knew how fast things could spiral. There were no antibiotics, no trained doctors riding along with the herd, and often no one nearby who could help. You either healed on your own, or you didn't, and many didn't. Water was always a gamble. Most of the time, cowboys drank from rivers, ponds, or streams that they shared with animals, both wild and domestic. That same water was used to cook, bathe, and clean whatever needed cleaning. And it was never filtered. It didn't take much for a gut infection to take hold. Dysentery, cholera, or other stomach bugs were common, and when they hit hard. A man could go from healthy to bedridden in a matter of hours. Dehydration was fast. Treatment was almost non-existent, and recovery, if it happened, was slow. Flies were everywhere. They covered open wounds, landed on food, swarmed the mess area, and carried bacteria with them. Cowboys ate with their hands, wiped their mouths on sleeves stained with sweat and blood, and didn't think twice about it. Hand washing wasn't a daily habit. Without soap and often without enough water, cleaning your hands before meals or after tending to a horse just didn't happen. The dirt under their nails wasn't just from the trail. It carried everything they came into contact with. Even something as simple as a toothache could turn fatal. Tooth infections were common, and once the rot set in, there was no easy fix. The only option was to pull it out, usually with a knife, pliers, or whatever someone could find. Pain relief was minimal. Whiskey, maybe. If the infection spread, it could reach the blood, and that was it. You weren't getting help out there. The truth is, cowboys lived close to death. Not just from guns or stampedes, but from the everyday wounds and germs that surrounded them. Illness wasn't dramatic. It crept in slowly, often quietly, and there was little you could do to stop it. Whether you were a lawman, outlaw, or just a ranch hand passing through, disease didn't care who you were. It was part of the job, part of the landscape, and part of why so many didn't live long enough to grow old on the frontier. Number 5. Toughness over comfort. Life as a cowboy didn't offer comfort, and no one expected it to. There were no warm beds waiting at the end of the day, no kitchens filled with hot meals, no bathrooms, no fresh clothes folded in a trunk somewhere. Everything was earned the hard way, and survival depended on how well you could push past discomfort without slowing down. The men who worked that land didn't chase ease, they chased cattle, sleep, and daylight, and they did it on an empty stomach more often than not. They didn't sit around complaining that they smelled bad or hadn't bathed in 2 weeks. No one cared. You could ride all day under the scorching sun, drenched in sweat, coated in dust, with the stink of horses and gunpowder in your clothes, and that was just normal. When everyone around you smelled the same, the subject of hygiene didn't even come up. They didn't notice it because the trail didn't give them time to. Every day was spent moving, working, watching, reacting. Every night was spent under the open sky, curled up in a blanket or coat, still wearing the same gear you'd sweated through since sunrise, and more often than not with a rifle or revolver within arm's reach. They weren't looking for comfort. They were looking for sleep that didn't get interrupted by coyotes, outlaws, or the sound of rustling cattle. The ground was hard, the wind cold, and the stars didn't care if you were sore. There were no pajamas or clean socks, just what you had, and you made it work. Sometimes it meant using your saddle as a pillow and your hat to cover your face from the moonlight. If it rained, you got wet. If it snowed, you huddled near the fire and hoped your boots weren't frozen in the morning. Food was basic, and nobody was picky. Beans, biscuits, and black coffee made over a smoky fire was the usual fare. If they were lucky, there was bacon or salt pork. They ate fast, often while standing or half asleep, because rest was never guaranteed and the herd didn't wait. Everything was about function, not enjoyment. They didn't have time to want things. They had time to keep going. There were no toothbrushes or fancy routines. You woke up with the sunrise, sore from the cold ground, maybe splashed some water on your face if there was any left, adjusted your hat, checked your gear, and got right back in the saddle. Pain, exhaustion, dirt. It was all background noise. Complaining didn't change anything. You either handled it or you got left behind. Cowboys weren't tough because it sounded good. They were tough because they had to be. The West didn't reward the weak. You needed grit to ride through those miles, to face storms, wild animals, armed strangers, and endless isolation. That toughness wasn't about attitude, it was about survival. Comfort was never part of the job. Strength, endurance, and silence, that's what got you through.